Hello and welcome to the Domesday Project. Next year will be dominated by one anniversary above all others, for in autumn 1986 it will be exactly 900 years since William the Conqueror's Domesday Book, our first and greatest public record. William's Domesday Survey was intended to set the seal on the Norman conquest of England in 1066 with an incredibly detailed picture of the land and its people, and it soon became known as Domesday Book because it was thought its judgments would stand until Doomsday. But now, 900 years on, a new Domesday is to be compiled, a unique record of life in Britain in the 1980s, the most comprehensive portrait of this or of any other country which has ever been assembled. Over 1 million people are helping to compile it. It will use the most advanced information technology specially developed for the project. And in this program, we'll show you how you can be involved and how you can actually contribute to this new Domesday. The original Domesday Book didn't cover the whole of the United Kingdom, only England about as far as Yorkshire and parts of Lancashire. It was intended to record the livelihood of the people and everything that was taxable down to the last pig, as a contemporary said. The new Domesday will include the whole of the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man.
We want your help to capture ideas of what life is like in Britain in the 1980s. And later in the programme, we'll be announcing details of our Domesday photographic competition. There'll be valuable prizes, but the main attraction will be the chance for thousands of you to have your photographs put on the discs and to be part of a record for future generations. But let's start by looking back at the original Domesday Book and the picture it gives us of life 900 years ago.
In 1086, nature had been only partly subdued by the people of England. Then over 90% of the population still lived in the countryside, their cultivated land hacked out of still immense areas of wilderness. At the time of the Norman conquest, England was still a land of forests. In the literature of the Anglo-Saxons, in their poems and stories, you can often feel its powerful presence. Towering trees, glorious with branches, tossing and murmuring. You can also feel the frightening darkness of the deep forest, where demons and monsters were thought to dwell, home only of poachers and outlaws. It's easy for us in the age of electricity to forget that in those days when night fell, the land became a sea of black with only the odd pinprick of light, perhaps a lantern in a church or an odd fire. And the lonesome traveller who had lost his way had to blow his horn and shout out to advertise that he was a friend. Much of the forests were already in royal ownership before 1066, but the Normans brought a quarter of all England under forest law, with the strictest penalties against their infringement. In places like this, Corby in Northamptonshire, such government decisions had far-reaching effects on the people. In the Domesday entry for Corby, there's a fascinating link with the present day. Corby sits on an ironstone field, and at that time there was an ironworks here which used the forest as fuel. We know that from the Domesday Book, which says that it was still valuable in 1086, although there was much lacking here at Corby, both in terms of the wood and in terms of the ironworks themselves, such as they were. It would appear that the Norman enclosure of this forest brought to an end that long tradition of ironworking here at Corby, although charcoal burners still worked in the forest up to the 14th century, burning their maple and oak in clearings like this one. When ironworking came back to Northamptonshire in Tudor times, and especially in the boom of the Industrial Revolution, strangely enough, Corby itself seems to have played no part. But then, during the Depression of the 1930s, that deep strand of historical continuity again touched the place. In 1934, a steelworks was built, which by the 1950s had become one of the biggest steel plants in Europe. But times changed. In 1980, Corby was closed down by British Steel. But the place remains part of that pattern of British life and industry, which can be traced back to the time of the Conqueror. It was nearly 20 years after the Battle of Hastings that William ordered the Domesday Survey in Gloucester at Christmas 1085. He then sent out his commissioners who travelled the length and breadth of England. They were to find out who owned what, how much the land was worth, and how much more could be got out of it. It's an ominously modern idea and gives us a clue as to what the Domesday Book actually is. It's the record of tax assessments. It's the equivalent of the government central computer today. In fact, one feels that a grasping tyrant like William the Conqueror would have been delighted to lay his hands on a computer if he could have. It might help to imagine the takeover by a multinational company, with the board probing deeply into staff and assets and even contractual obligations, because for long afterwards the Domesday Book was viewed as a register of rightful possession. And one reason why it was done was surely that after 20 years ruling this conquered land, the Normans were driven out of their orderly minds by the baffling variety of local custom and regional law in England when it came to land tenure. Let's look at one example. A little village in Warwickshire, Hodnall. Here in the Domesday Book we've got the portrait of a single tiny community with its pastures, its meadows, the number of ploughs. It's risen in assessment since 1066. 20 shillings it was worth then, 60 shillings now, says the scribe. With a population perhaps too small to have its own church, 3 thanes, 26 villagers and smallholders. About 100 people altogether, perhaps, with their families. One vivid little insight, and all the more touching because Hodnall doesn't exist today. In the 15th century, Hodnall was deliberately demolished by a Tudor landowner, one of hundreds of villages laid waste to open up land for more economic farming. But through the Domesday Book, we can uncover the roots of these lost places, surrounded now by the shadowy strips ploughed by medieval farmers. The most remarkably documented story is the Domesday village of Wormleighton. From the air, its layout can be clearly seen. In 1086, over 200 people lived here. Wormleighton is still owned by the family who bought it in the reign of Henry VII, the Spencers, whose descendant is the Princess of Wales. They bought it for its sheep. At medieval Wormleighton, as at modern Corby, we come face to face with the social changes which have made up our history. Today's visitor can recover its lost life from the signs left on the ground down in the pasture. For, ironically, though sheep had been the wealth of Wormleighton as far back as Anglo-Saxon times, sheep would be the downfall of its people. These mounds mark the site of the medieval moated manor house of Wormleighton, a sorry thatched place, said John Spencer when he bought it in 1506. He demolished it in order to build his fine red brick house on the hill. And this is the heart of what was the medieval village of Wormleighton, the village green. Around us, the grassy hillocks mark the site of gardens, barns, sunken ways and little lanes of a once thriving medieval community, which was destroyed at a stroke in 1499 by a ruthless Tudor capitalist, at about the same time as 100 other villages in South Warwickshire alone were devastated. There was an eyewitness to these events, a Warwick priest called John Rouse. "What shall I say about this modern laying waste of villages," he wrote. "The root of the evil is greed. A plague of avarice infects our country. The men who do this are not sons of God, but sons of Mammon. They enclose our villages with banks and mounds, they surround them with ditches, they even cut off the king's highway, so that the poor people either cannot escape or they cannot come back into their native home." 60 people were driven off the land here at Wormleighton to tears and idleness, as a contemporary said. In practice, that meant starvation, begging, or finding your fortune in the nearest big town, which in this case was the boom town of the medieval textile industry, Coventry. The canal at the foot of Wormleighton Hill is a symbol of yet another momentous change in the lives of the people of England, the Industrial Revolution and the ensuing exodus from the country to the towns. Coventry, in a sense, stands for all our industrial cities. For since 1086, it has gone through many industrial cycles and has been forced to keep changing with the times, from the medieval textile boom to the manufacture of silk ribbons, bicycles and sewing machines in the 19th century. All have made their mark and left their scars on the city. The Coventry into whose heart the canal leads has progressed over 900 years to today's city of 300,000 people with its car works and its new electronics industries. But it is still the same place as the village recorded in William the Conqueror's Domesday Book in 1086 as Land of the Countess Godiva. 50 villagers, 12 smallholders, 7 slaves with 20 ploughs, a mill at 3 shillings, and woodland 2 leagues long.
Well, that was the Domesday Book. And now for the new Domesday Project, which we believe is the largest and most ambitious of its kind anywhere in the world. But it might be reassuring to anyone who's still overawed by modern information technology that it's going to take rather longer to compile the new video discs than it did the book. And also that this time no one will be forced to take part. It's volunteers only. Already 13,000 schools are involved. Primary schools, comprehensives, sixth form colleges and universities. And they're being joined by many branches of the Women's Institutes. The National Scouts and Guides organisations and the Nature Conservancy Council will be supporting the project, along with many others too. Now, if you belong to a group that would like to take part, we'd be glad to hear from you. Our aim is to produce what we might call a people's database of information on every community in Britain, produced by the communities themselves. Now, it's going to be stored on 2 video discs like this one. Now, it looks a bit like an LP, but as well as sound, these discs can store pictures as well as vast amounts of information. So much that they're equivalent to 2 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, to get the information that's stored on the discs, you'll need a new video disc player, which scans the disc with a laser beam. Now, by linking the player to a microcomputer, you can search the disc for whatever facts, figures or pictures you want, and then call them up on the screen. This may all seem a bit remote and high-tech, but we hope that it'll be a means of making information about Britain in the 1980s available to more people than ever before. A lot of it will be coming from the mainframe computers of the National Data Archive at the University of Essex. It's a storehouse of most major official and semi-official surveys, everything from the 1981 census to the latest political opinion polls. On the discs too is a massive BBC survey of the way we spend our lives, plotted every 15 minutes of the day. But of course, there are many stories about Britain in the 80s that can only be told in pictures. And the Ordnance Surveys of both Great Britain and Northern Ireland are planning to include 20,000 maps covering the whole country. But as we said at the beginning of the programme, it's not just the official view of Britain that'll be on the discs, it's what you think too. The country has been carved up into 23,000 small areas. This gives an impression of the grid. Each area is 4 by 3 kilometres and has been allocated to either a school or one of the other survey groups. You can see from this map how much coverage you've got at the moment. The darker areas are 100% covered, but where the map gets lighter, there are still gaps. So there's still plenty of opportunity for many more people to be involved, especially in the rural areas. But wherever you live, or whoever's running your local project, there are lots of ways you can volunteer your help. It'll all be happening this summer. The aim is to collect 4 kinds of information. First of all, we're looking at how land is used in different parts of the country. In Swansea, for example, the children of Dunvant Primary School went on field trips, and they categorised this area as rough grazing land. There'll also be a count of the amenities that can be found in each neighbourhood. In the West Country, 6th formers from Wootton Bassett Comprehensive School near Swindon went out gathering information on their own doorstep about the distribution of local post offices, parks and cinemas.
There's 10, and then there's another 9 building societies.
These students are finding their work on the project a useful part of their A-level geography course. And each group is producing slide photographs with help from photographers in the community. Here's what the pupils of Wester Common School in Glasgow thought about their area. There'll also be the chance for people to write in their own words about life in their community today. In Belfast, an industrial estate built on former meadowland was one of the subjects chosen by the children of Fane Street Primary School.
Will the many changes improve the quality of life of the residents? Only time will tell.
So let's get an idea of what we can do with a video disc. With a disc player and a microcomputer linked together, it's a fast and relatively simple task to get access to the kind of information you want. And using this device, called a mouse, it makes it even easier than tapping it into the keyboard of the computer, because you simply use it to move a pointer around a screen like that. So let's start with a map of Britain. There it is. Now, let's move in and have a closer look at southern England. And then we can go to a 40 by 30 kilometre area around West Midlands. So let's go to Coventry, Wormleighton, those parts. Now, using the cursor, I can go even closer, let's say southwest of Coventry, to a 4 by 3 kilometre area. And still using the cursor, I can move across those parishes and actually come along to Kenilworth. And this is the size of area that each school is plotting on the Domesday survey. Now, some landmarks are also on the disc. They're indicated by this box. So let's move the cursor to Kenilworth's most famous landmark. That's Kenilworth Castle. There it is. And there's a plan of the castle. That's what it looks like. Well, I went over to Kenilworth to get a flavour of the life there and to see how the local school children are interpreting their town for the video disc.
It's a bird! It's a plane! It's Superman! I'm always ready to help one and all, even with a wake-up call. You set the alarm, so I'm here to say brush your teeth and start a new day.
My name's Philippa Skin and I'm 11 years old. I'm writing a day in my life for the Domesday Project. I get up at 6:45 most mornings, especially when I have to go to school. After I've had a wash, I go downstairs and have breakfast with my mum and sister.
Philippa, come on, love. It's ready. There you go.
My sister Penny and I set off for school just before 8:30.
Yeah. Bye. Bye. Bye, love. Bye. Have a good day.
Yeah,
Bye.
It's only a few minutes' walk from our home to our school, which is called St Nicholas, Kenilworth.
You know, the Doctor Who thing I talked about, people 900 years' time looking at the discs and thinking, what was life like in Kenilworth? What sort of things do you think we could do, write about? Philippa? Again?
Take photographs.
We could take some photographs, but taking photographs is part of the project. Any other ideas? Bridget?
We could write about what we eat.
We could write about all sorts of things we eat, yes, diet. What's important to the town? What sort of things have we got to have, and what kind of people looking after us? Beth?
Talk to the farmers.
We could talk to farmers, yes, that would be a very good one to do. Right, girls and boys, day 1 is next Monday.
Hello, this is Beth Grenfell from St Nicholas School.
I was wondering if I could come and ask you some questions about the Domesday Project.
This is the old Kenilworth railway line.
What do you like about living in Kenilworth? What do you think it'll be like in the future?
I don't know, it's all complicated and restaurants.
I don't know, Sarah, whether he's going to have an emergency in the middle of your interview.
Crew, shunt! Crew, as detailed, get to work!
Is it a full-time job?
No, at Kenilworth we're what's known as retained firemen, which means that we've all got other jobs. Some of the lads work on the building trade, electricians, bricklayers. There's another lad who's got his own gardening business, and they call us with a bleep system, which calls us into the station, and then we turn out from there.
Do you have lots of fires in Kenilworth?
Well, fires are very strange things. They don't come at set intervals, but I would say on average we get between 2 and 4 fires a week.
Okay, then we'll get a photographer down there as soon as we can, okay?
Sorry, we can see you're a bit busy, but what hits the headlines most?
Well, there's a lot of big issues at the moment, and the major issue is just where the new swimming pool in Kenilworth should be built. There's issues about the protection of the green spaces in Kenilworth. We've got here a letter which explains with great concern what's happening to our town at the moment because of redevelopment.
Do you get a lot of letters about dogs?
Yes, it's the one issue actually that does generate a considerable amount of correspondence, perhaps more than any of the other issues I've had. But action is being taken at district council level. I think they think that it's a question of educating the owners and not educating the dogs.
What sort of people come to live in Kenilworth?
We've seen an influx into Kenilworth of the professional classes. The town's position in the Midlands has created that popularity, but it hasn't created that much tension with the older people, although they are concerned that the town is changing its character, that it wasn't the town it used to be.
I remember when it was green fields all round. Kenilworth must have been about half the size then to what it is now.
I like the smallness of the place. I like the fact that if I come out shopping, I'm almost certain to meet somebody I know when I'm out.
So I've still got quite a few friends here that I know.
The air, I think. Yeah. The air's different. The air's different.
I suppose, like most people my age, I don't like to see too much change. I look around me and I think the improvements are just a tribute to big business rather than for the good of the people of Kenilworth.
What qualities do you need to be a good farmer?
The main quality is dedication, really. It's a nice life. It's also a hard life, and you've got to be dedicated to it, especially with animals. You've got to love animals to work well with them. Otherwise, you don't get the best results. We get up early in the morning and feed the animals before breakfast, both the animals inside and the ones in the field. And then when we're lambing and calving, we stay up till midnight with the sheep, and then we get up again during the night at least a couple of times for the sheep. Generally they're fairly straightforward, but you can get some where you've got 2 or 3 lambs where they get tangled up and you perhaps get one leg of one lamb and one leg of another lamb, and you've then got to push them back and sort them out. Well, it's a very good lamb, it's a pity she hasn't got 2 long.
In the spring, the farmers have to get up in the middle of the night to look after the sheep for lambing.
we should put that we think the older houses look much nicer than the new ones because they're all crushed together.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
They hardly got gardens.
Yes.
The gardens they have got are
I
very
think
small.
the other point is that a lot of people think that it's important to keep it because when we went to the newspaper shop, the editor said that there were a lot of letters about the conservation and the green belt.
As a parent, Graham, do you think the project has had value for the children, and for your son, Tim?
Oh, absolutely. I think if I sort of talk from Tim's perspective, the technology fascinated him. The thought of the laser disc, the input from their own computers, and a lot of the children in this town have now got their own personal computers. And I think that initially fired his imagination. Then I think there's the aspect of the history of it, which is super, because no longer it seems that we're stuck with children learning history as something from the past. With this project,
something from books.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They've got the opportunity now not only to learn history, but to be history.
I think the Domesday Project's very good because it makes you find out about your town much more and things that you wouldn't really look into, and you find out what sort of place you do actually live in.
The people of Kenilworth putting their view of the town onto disc, one piece in the national jigsaw that we hope will build up to a unique portrait of the country as a whole. But how will all the information on the 2 discs be used? The final discs won't be ready till the end of next year, but we can get an impression of how they'll work. Imagine a class planning their annual field trip. They've got the video disc, which can call up any place in the country, maps, pictures and information.
Now, our school have decided this year to go to Cornwall, so let's zoom in on one area of coastline. That flashing Space Invader symbol there means that we can actually go for a simulated walk around this beach. So let's start by walking to the top of the beach. Now we can look around us by using the micro keyboard to let us look behind or to the side. And if we want to take a closer look at the seaweed lying along the tide line, we can do that too. In fact, there's some flotsam and a dried cuttlefish. And I can even see what the weather's like by glancing up at the sky. Now, which way shall we go? I think let's go west across the sand. There's plenty of shell fragments and even the remains of a shore crab washed up by the tide. This is rather good. I'd like to have a look at the cliff over there on the right. Let's see if the Domesday disc can take us there. So we go across the sand, past a razor shell, over to the cliff, which has some sea pinks growing on it. We can look at some of the shells lying in the sand and up at the cliff top with the sky above. So with the help of this walk, the school group can decide exactly what they want to study before they get to Cornwall, and there'll be several walks on the discs, indoors and outdoors.
We also believe the discs will be of real use to people in business. Let's imagine a man is looking for a site to set up a petrol station, perhaps in Leicestershire, let's say Loughborough. He goes to the local reference library, which has the Domesday discs. Now, here's one of the potential sites. There it is. So first of all, he can mark out the catchment area for the proposed garage. Now we've got to find out how many people live in this district, so I can press that, and I can see the population pattern for Leicestershire. The spots where the most people live are red and blue. So, what's the total number of people in his area? Coming up in the corner should be the figure. Just over 78,000, in fact. Of course, some of these people may not actually have a car, so now I can select some information on car ownership. Now, this shows the proportion of households with 2 or more cars. It looks quite high in his area. But perhaps there are already too many petrol stations in the vicinity, so we better check on that. Well, according to this, there aren't many petrol stations in the area at all. So, in theory, it would be quite a good place to set one up. But of course, this is only a demonstration, and we'll have to wait till the discs come out next year for the real results. What if someone wants to see pictures of our everyday life in the 80s? That's where our national photographic competition comes in. This will be the chance for up to 5,000 people to have their photographs, the images of how they see life in our times, stored on the discs for posterity. Of course, for the winners, there's the added bonus of prizes, photographic equipment worth £4,000. The theme is British life in the 1980s, and we're looking for entries in 6 different categories. To give an indication of what we're after, let's look back at how these same 6 categories were illustrated by the photographers of the 1880s.
With us Colin Ford, keeper of the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television in Bradford, to help us launch our new 20th century national photographic record. Colin, are there obvious guidelines for entrance?
Well, the first one, I think, is to caption your picture. This one behind us, which I think is a fascinating picture, actually comes to us without any kind of information. I don't know who the people are, I don't know where they are, I don't know when it was taken.
So context is really important for a photograph to be a historical record?
Absolutely. I mean, people always say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I think without any words it's not worth anything at all.
Now, what about the subject matter? I see we've got one here from, I guess, 40 or 50 years ago. Are scenes of everyday life worth recording now in our over-recorded age?
Oh, yes, they are. I think they're the rarest. You see, those collections of Victorian pictures that we've just been seeing, they're the result, most of them, of 10 years' research to find out what Britain was like 100 years ago. And the pictures that were the most difficult to find were always the everyday things that are around you in the home, in the place where you work, out in the street. We always take ourselves, we always get ourselves photographed in our Sunday best, don't we? We always get our hair right and get our best clothes on, photograph ourselves at weddings and christenings and things like that. But I want to see pictures of everyday life, things that people do all the time.
So even if we think that they're not particularly important, these are the things that historians of the future may want to read off our photographs?
Oh, I think so. And I think this picture, you know, of Wandsworth in 1935, you really see what people were doing, what they were wearing, what conditions were like. Now, I think those are the most exciting pictures.
What about recording things that are likely to be lost in 100 years' time, let alone 900?
Yes.
What areas there would you advise?
Well, I think that's very difficult, because I think each entrant has to use their own brain to decide what it is that they see around them that's going to disappear. I don't know whether the telephone boxes and the pillar boxes and so on, the picture behind us, are going to disappear. They keep telling us they're going to change, but I'm not sure. But if you think anything that you see in your common everyday life is going to change, is going to disappear, that's the thing to snap, because that's what the historians of the 21st century will want to know about.
But it's people most of all that are the thing you would want to...
Well, I'm interested in people, and of course that is one of the categories, the faces in the 80s is one of the categories of the competition. And if you're photographing a face, I think it's true for a face as it is for everything else, that one of the things that is special about a record photograph, although perhaps it applies to any good photograph, is simplify and get rid of everything that confuses the picture.
So that's the final guideline, home in and give the historian an image which really means something.
Yes, because we are looking for pictures that will tell historians something. Of course, if you can obey all those rules that we've suggested and take an exciting, surprising, beautiful picture, well, you're in with a very good chance.
Thanks to Colin Ford, it's hoped that some of the entries will go on display at the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television at Bradford. Now to those prizes we mentioned. For the best overall picture, there'll be a choice of photographic equipment and materials up to a total value of £1,000. Then for the best picture in each category, the prize value will be £500. Even if you're not among the prize winners, there's a chance that your picture will be one of the 5,000 that could be used on the Domesday discs. The judging will be done by a panel of independent experts, including Colin Ford, and advisors from Kodak Limited, who are acting as technical consultants to the competition. Let's have a reminder of the 6 categories. Street life in the 80s, country life in the 80s, faces of the 80s, leisure in the 80s, work in the 80s, and home life in the 80s. You can enter more than one picture for any category, but there's a maximum of 12 entries per person allowed. And they must be 35mm transparencies like this one. Also, don't take your pictures this way up because the shape doesn't really fit very well inside a television screen, but do it round that side, like that. Now, all your entries must have been taken in the 1980s to qualify. If you've got a treasured slide you want to send in, we can make a duplicate and return your original to you, providing you send a stamped addressed envelope. There's an entry form with the full rules in the current issue of the Radio Times, or if you like, you can pick one up from a number of local BBC centres. Or you can get an entry form by sending a stamped addressed envelope to this address. The Domesday Project, National Photographic Competition, Hemel Hempstead, Hertfordshire, HP1 1JU. And this address, plus further information about the competition, can be found on CFAX page 185. Please don't send any slides to this address until you've read the rules carefully and filled in an entry form. Technical quality won't be the main factor. What we're really looking for is originality, imagination and topicality. All the things that help illustrate life in the United Kingdom in the 80s. So don't feel you have to be a camera buff to take part. The closing date for entries is September the 27th this year, and the results will be announced in a special programme on BBC One.
But how will people view our society in 100 years' time when they're celebrating the 1000th anniversary of the original Domesday Book? The data and the images being assembled for the Domesday Project will form part of the next century's view of us. Very likely they will show a society going through far-reaching changes. Changes in work patterns, in industry, in the community, in the family, and in the role of women. But in our century, technological change has been so rapid that it's hard to be sure how we'll be viewed in 100 years' time, let alone in 900. Will the 1980s be seen merely as a rapid acceleration in the decline of a former world power, or, on the other hand, as the beginning of a new phase in the constantly changing history of these islands, a phase as momentous as the agrarian and industrial revolutions before it? The Domesday Project may provide us with some of the answers, and we hope that you'll take part. Goodbye.